Come all of you, come all of us, and bless the one who blesses. Come all of you, come all of us, and bless the one who blesses.
Am I awake? Am I prepared? Are you listening to my prayer? Can you hear my voice? Can you understand? Am I awake? Am I prepared? Ya la 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 la, 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 ya la 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 la. Am I awake? Am I prepared? Are you listening to my prayer? Can you hear my voice? Can you understand? Am I awake? Am I prepared? ya la 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 la, 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 ya la 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 la. Barechu et Adonai HaMevorach. Baruch Adonai HaMevorach Le'olam va'ed, Le'olam va'ed. Ya la 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 la, 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 ya la 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 la.
הנה מה טוב ומנעים שברחים גם יחד. 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 How good it is, how sweet it is, to be together on this day. How good it is, how sweet it is, to be together on this day. הנה מה טוב ומנעים שברחים גם יחד. הנה מה טוב ומנעים שברחים גם יחד. שלום עליכם, סלאם עליכום. שלום עליכם, סלאם עליכום. שלום עליכם, סלאם עליכום. שלום עליכם, סלאם עליכום. How good it is, how sweet it is, to be together on this day. How good it is, how sweet it is, to be together on this day. הנה מה טוב ומנעים שברחים גם יחד. הנה מה טוב ומנעים שברחים גם יחד. שלום עליכם, סלאם עליכום. שלום עליכם, סלאם עליכום.
Please be seated. Good morning, friends, and welcome. I'm Rabbi Michael Friedman, Senior Rabbi here at Temple Israel. It means so much to see how many of you have joined us here in person. And I know that there are many also on the live stream from home or the office. You've joined us here to remember, to salute, and to pay tribute to our beloved friend and husband and father-in-law and grandfather, Mike Stashower. This is one of the final days of the Jewish year, 5782. And so it is perhaps fitting that as this year closes, a chapter closes as well for this beloved and loving family. Mike lived way more than a chapter. He lived a full novel, a full story, a full narrative of life, 96 years. And in those 96 years, he was a patriarch and a pillar. He was a man of class and intellect and wit and loyalty. I was privileged that during my first few years here at Temple Israel, I would see Mike and Gloria, and of course their family here pretty often at Temple Israel, even as mobility became a bit of a challenge. And then came COVID and the distance that was required of everyone. It coincided with a decline in health for Mike. And so it was much less often in the last few years that we saw one another. But this is the right time and this is the right place to remember him, to smile, and sometimes to shed a tear. And that's what we will do today as we remember our beloved Mike Stashower. Death has taken our husband, our father-in-law, our grandfather, our friend. Despite the sunshine outside these sanctuary windows, our world is a bit darker. Our hearts are heavy. When our friends here in this front row shed a tear, we know that they are overcome with loss, sorrow. And so we pray that at this time, that they may find the loving presence of family and friends. And we ask on this day and the days to come, O God, that you hear them, you comfort them, you be with them, you walk with them through this valley of shadows, as we call it. And so too, God, we thank you for Mike's love that brought us together in life and brings us together today. We thank you for the pleasant memories that we bring to this place, the companionship that we shared along life's path, the gifts of his heart and mind that will be paid testament to today. For all these and more, O God, we give our thanks to you. Throughout the generations, we have used the words of our Psalms to find strength and resilience at times of loss. So I'd like to invite Mike's son-in-law, Paul, to come forward and help me with the 121st Psalm. Esai nai al hei harim me'ayin yavo ezri me'im Adonai oseh shamayim va'aretz. Al yitain lamut raglecha, al yanum shomrecha, hine lo yanum velo yishan shomer Yisrael. Adonai shomrecha, Adonai tzilcha al yad yeminecha, yomam hashemesh lo yakeka v'yareach balayla. Adonai yishmorcha mikol ra, yishmor et nafshecha. Adonai yishmor tzeitcha uvoecha me'ata ve'ad olam.
I turn my eyes to the mountains. From where will my help come? My help comes from Adonai, maker of heaven and earth. God will not let your foot give way. Your guardian will not slumber. See, the guardian of Israel neither slumbers nor sleeps. Adonai is your guardian. Adonai is your protection at your right hand. By day, the sun will not strike you, nor the moon by night. Adonai will guard you from all harm. God will guard your life. Adonai will guard your going and coming, now and forever.
Amen.
Amen.
Thank you.
Should I leave this here for him? Sure. Should I go?
Thank you. Our cherished words of the 23rd Psalm provide the biblical poet's vision of a perfect life, a life of ease and comfort and peace. Adonai ro'i lo echsar, binot desha yarbitzeni, al mei menuchot yenachaleni nafshi yeshovev. Yancheni v'magle tzedek lema'an shemo, gam ki elech begetz al mavet lo irara, ki ata imadi, shivtecha umishantecha hema yenachamuni, ta'aroch lefanai shulchan neged sorarai, tishanta v'shemen roshi kosi revaya, ach tov v'chesed yirdafuni kol yemei chayai, v'shavti bevet Adonai la'orech yamim. I welcome Mike's daughter-in-law, Allison Adler.
Do I read the title? A Psalm of David. Adonai is my shepherd, I lack nothing. God makes me lie down in green pastures. God leads me to water in places of repose. God renews life. God guides me in right paths. See, I haven't put this. As befits God's name. Though I walk through a valley of deeper darkness, I fear no harm, for you are with me. Your rod and your staff, they comfort me. You spread a table for me in full view of my enemies. You anoint my head with oil. My drink is abundant. Only goodness and steadfast love shall pursue me all the days of my life. And I shall dwell in the house of Adonai for many long years.
Ecclesiastes was a wise man who lived in Jerusalem nearly 2,000 years ago. Perhaps he lived as long as Mike, but I don't think so. We don't know exactly, but I'm willing to bet that Mike outlived Ecclesiastes. Ecclesiastes saw so much in his day, as did Mike, and he handed down to us these words. L'kol zman ve'et l'chol chefetz tachat hashamayim, et laledet ve'et lamut, et latat ve'et lakor natua, et lifrotz ve'et livnot, et livkot ve'et lischok, et spod ve'et rokod, et lahashlich avanim ve'et knos avanim, et lachavok ve'et lerchok mechabek, et levakesh ve'et leabed, et lishmor ve'et lashlich, et likroa ve'et litpor, et lachashot ve'et ladaber. Michael.
For everything, there is a season, a time for every experience under heaven, a time to be born and a time to die, a time to plant and a time to uproot what is planted, a time to tear down and a time to build up, a time to weep and a time to laugh, a time to grieve and a time to dance, a time to throw stones and a time to gather stones, a time to embrace and a time to refrain from embracing, a time to seek and a time to lose, a time to keep and a time to discard, a time to tear and a time to sow, a time to keep silence and a time to speak.
And so speak we shall on this day of Mike Stashower. We welcome Susan first to the bema.
Thank you all for coming, whether in person or on live stream. It means so much to our family to have all of you with us today. My dad was such a people person. He would have been really pleased to see all of you. I want to start by relaying a conversation. All right, Debbie and I practiced to see if we could get through it without crying, but I don't think I'm going to make it. Okay. Won't be the first time or the last time that somebody cried giving a speech at a funeral. Okay. I want to start by relaying a conversation I had with my father a little over 3 years ago. So he was 92. And he was hospitalized for several days because he needed a pacemaker. But he was not in any life-threatening danger, but understandably, his mortality was apparently on his mind. At one point, I visited him in the hospital, and it was just the two of us. And I sat with him while he ate his dinner, and he turned to me and he said, "You know, Sue, life doesn't owe me anything. I've been so fortunate. I married a wonderful woman, and we have a very happy marriage. We have a wonderful family, our children, their spouses, my grandchildren. I had a great career, great friends. We've traveled the world, and I never expected to live as long as I have. So really, life doesn't owe me anything." And I thought to myself, what a gift he just gave me, because when the time does come, it will be a great comfort to me to know that this is how he feels about his life. Well, the time is now, and I share this with you, hoping that it will be a comfort to all of us today as we mourn, memorialize, and celebrate that wonderful life that doesn't owe him anything. Because like George Bailey in the Frank Capra movie, Mike Stashower had a wonderful life. By all accounts, my father had a very happy childhood. He grew up in Cleveland with his parents, Ty and Joe, and his younger brother, Arthur. I remember all of them as being incredibly warm and loving. It was the Depression, and at some point, his father lost his job, and the family was broke. They didn't even own a car. And they moved in with his mother's parents to a two-family home. But the way my father told the story, there was never any bitterness or a sense that this was a hardship. Both his parents came from large and very close families, so there were always a lot of aunts, uncles, and cousins around, but even more so when they lived with his grandparents. So if anything, my father seemed to have gotten even more love and attention as he was growing up with this arrangement. My dad was a good student, and like my mom, he graduated at the top of his class in high school. He ran track on his high school team, something he was very proud of. He was outgoing, and he made friends easily. He played the clarinet and the saxophone, and he always had tremendous confidence. And he was good looking. Enough so to catch the eye of a very cute Jewish girl from Shaker Heights. But more about that later. My dad graduated high school during World War II, and he was accepted into an officer training program in the Navy that sent him to Hobart College in upstate New York. When the war was over, he transferred to Cornell, where after a few semesters, an advisor apparently surprised him one day and said, "You have enough credits to graduate." He was completely unprepared for this. Apparently, he really liked it at Cornell, and he wasn't quite ready to go out into the world. So when the advisor suggested that he stay on and get an MBA from their new business school, he said, sure, that sounds good. In his telling, this was the extent of his career planning. But he ended up becoming an accountant, which was actually quite fortunate because he was really good with numbers. Well into his old age, and even until fairly recently, and even when he was battling dementia, he was still able to do Sudoku and to do math in his head. Okay, back to the cute girl. He famously met my mother on a tennis court in Cleveland where they were introduced by a mutual friend. Apparently, they had an instant and special connection from the very beginning and continued to date even though it was long distance. When she graduated from college, they got married. She was 20 and he was 24. They were married for almost 72 years. I once asked my father what he thought the secret to a long-term happy marriage was. He said, luck and compatibility. My parents had both. So it was the 50s, and they had a pretty traditional life typical of those times. They raised 3 children, myself, Debbie, and John. And Mom stayed home and Dad went to work. But Dad was always home for dinner and was very much a family man on the weekends. My dad was successful in his career, despite the lack of career planning, helped very much by the fact that my mom was more than willing to relocate if it meant a better job opportunity for him. They moved our family from Cleveland to Detroit, then to Larchmont, and finally to Westport, as Dad climbed the corporate ladder, eventually becoming the CFO of PerkinElmer in Norwalk. After he left PerkinElmer at the age of 59, he went to work for a tech startup many years before it was fashionable, and eventually landed another CFO position when he was in his 60s. During all those years, my parents collected an enormous number of close friends. In addition to staying in touch with their very large extended family, they kept up with a good number of friends from the various places they lived, and for a very long time. One of the sad things about living to 96 is that you outlive many of those friends and family members. When he was 67, my dad was diagnosed with prostate cancer. After undergoing surgery and having a full recovery, he decided to retire from working. But retirement for him certainly did not mean sitting around the house. In fact, it might have been the best period of my parents' lives. My dad continued to donate his accounting services in a volunteer capacity, first as an advisor in Slovakia, which allowed my parents to live in Bratislava for several months, and then as an advisor to the committee to bring the Olympics to New York City in 2012, which, among other things, allowed them to get a great view of the New York City 4th of July fireworks one year alongside Michael Bloomberg. In addition to a very busy social life, they traveled extensively, went to plays, movies, and concerts, spent a month in Florida every year. My dad actively participated in the Wise Men, the Senior Center, and numerous other volunteer activities. He even got involved in local politics and was elected to the Westport Planning and Zoning Commission. He had open heart surgery when he was in his 80s, after which he added regular workouts at the Y to his routine. For the past few weeks, we knew that the end of his life was near. So I've had time to reflect on what his wonderful life has meant for me. Of course, he taught me some practical things: how to ride a bike, how to ice skate, how to drive. He tried teaching me how to throw, but that didn't work out too well. I still throw like a girl. He also thought he could help teach me to play the piano because he had taken a few years of lessons. When I first started taking piano lessons, he would stand over me and correct my mistakes, which was incredibly annoying. Fortunately for me, I took to the piano immediately, and in short order, I was better than he was. He stopped standing over me when I practiced, which was one of my proudest achievements. But more importantly, he taught me through the example of how he lived his life about his values. He was anchored by a strong sense of family, of Jewish tradition, and of right and wrong. By right and wrong, I mean a sense of social justice, but if you knew my father, he also had a sense that he was always right and everybody else was always wrong. He was honest to a fault, even correcting restaurant bills when they undercharged him for something. He believed in hard work, responsibility, and purposefulness, but always balanced with enjoyment. As an example, when we lived in Larchmont, my dad suddenly realized that we were close to Long Island Sound. He read a book about sailing and then bought a sailboat and enjoyed both racing and sailing his boat for many years on beautiful summer days. He loved music, and he played his clarinet for decades in the Westport Community Band every Monday night and marched in the Memorial Day parade until he couldn't march anymore, and then he drove his convertible in the parade. He was an extrovert who loved being around people and always encouraged my mother to make social plans and to entertain, not that she needed much encouragement. He came from a tradition of giving back to the community, and his volunteer activities are really too many to keep track of. Nonprofit boards, Temple Israel leadership, local causes. In fact, over the last few days, we keep learning about things that he did that we didn't even know about. He also never took himself too seriously and liked to find humor in a situation, even if it was corny humor. I think that's what they now actually call dad humor. And so in reflecting on his life and how it's affected me, it's these values that I think of more than anything. More than the memories, which someday may fade for me just as sadly as they did for him at the end of his life. To the extent that I've been able to learn from those values how to live a good, decent, and happy life, I'm eternally grateful. And it's by trying to continue to use his values as a roadmap for my own life that I'll keep my dad alive in my heart for the rest of my days.
We welcome Debbie.
A few years ago, I was in California with my parents for my Uncle Arthur's funeral. And I had a conversation with my father, and he said, you know, it's really weird going to a funeral because I wish that my brother could have been there to hear all of those wonderful things that people said about him. And I know he wasn't the first person to have that idea. It was an entire episode of Curb Your Enthusiasm, as I'm sure you're going to tell me. But it really made a lot of sense. And I thought about that the following year when we celebrated his 90th birthday. And we had the chance to tell him and to celebrate his life and tell him all about, make the jokes and tell the stories and really tell him how much he meant to us. And I can honestly say that there is nothing that I can say here today about my father that he didn't already know. In the fall of 2018, as many of you know, he started to experience some symptoms of dementia. But after a few months, whether it was medication or some mysterious neurological phenomenon or his sheer stubbornness, he got better. And within a few months, he was back to his old self. And he would talk about that period when he had been confused. And I remember he said, I feel like I've been given this incredible gift. I've been given more time. Now, the one thing was that he was blissfully unaware during that period of who the President of the United States was, and he said he wished he could have kept that part of the condition indefinitely. Sadly, it did return, but I like to think about those years. When I think my parents, in their 9th and 10th decades at that time, were perhaps at their happiest. My mother would tell me that every night after dinner, they would sit together and they would talk about how grateful they were and how much they had in their lives. They had good health. They had happy children and grandchildren. They had wonderful, wonderful friends who meant the world to them. They had many, 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 many activities. They were always busy, and most of all, they had each other. And that was when we started referring to him as Mushy Mike, because whenever we were together, generally fueled by at least one martini, he would like to just tell us how much he loved us, how much he loved all of us, but especially how much he loved Gloria. On their 70th wedding anniversary in October of 2020, we all braved COVID and we got together to celebrate and to toast them. And I remember we told my parents that for us, for Susan and Paul, for John and Allison, and for Michael and myself, they set a really, really high bar for what a marriage is supposed to be, that we may never actually live up to. And I think he set the same bar for how to live his life. I know that sometimes at situations like this, people sometimes quote Abraham Lincoln, who famously said, "In the end, it's not the years in your life that count, it's the life in your years." And in my father's case, he had both.
My father obviously lived undeniably a great life, and as have already been discussed, undeniably a long life. I think it's natural when your parents get to a certain age to start to think about how much time they have left. I remember thinking to myself, we were going to be having a bar mitzvah in the family, and, wouldn't it be nice if he was still alive for that? And that was Scott's bar mitzvah. That was in 2013, and he was there. He danced with my mother. And I really didn't have a lot of expectations that he would still be around for Matthew's bar mitzvah, which was 6.5 years later. But he was not only there, he was right here, because the kid that Matthew got bar mitzvahed with, his grandfather did his aliyah from sitting down. And I said to my father, I said, "Dad, you're 93. You can just sit, and they'll bring you a microphone, and you can do it." Matthew, what was his reaction to that? He said, "I'm not a cripple. I'm going up on the bima," and he did, and he gave a speech that night, and then he lived 3 more years. So it was amazing. He, as has been discussed, had his share of issues towards the end of his life. I've always felt the saddest issue that he was dealing with was his inability to hear, because it really left him unable to converse. I'm like, are you kidding me? Mike Stashower, unable to converse? I mean, it's like Pavarotti, unable to sing. I mean, very often when I would come to services, when I still come to services here, I think back to when I came to services as a kid here. And when you're a kid, when the service ends, you want to go home. No. We couldn't go home because after the service came the schmooze fest, right? Right on that patio, we could not go home until my father had schmoozed every member of the congregation. When I graduated from college, my friends and I, we rented like a room, a restaurant. And so people started to arrive, and the people didn't know each other, so they were kind of sitting with their families. There was not a lot of interaction, and that changed when Mike started to work the room. What's your name? Where are you from? What's your major? What are your hopes and dreams and aspirations? And that broke the ice, and then everyone started mingling. I remember my friends came up to me and said, "Geez, your dad, he should go into politics." And he did, a little bit anyway. But my father enjoyed a good conversation, a good debate. He liked to make his point. It didn't matter if that was at a time when you were trying to make your point. But, and if, he was very well versed on a number of subjects. And if he was ever wrong, you alluded to this, silly story, but I always liked it. We were skiing in Vermont, right? She knows. And our station wagon got stuck in a snowdrift outside our house. So my father kneels down next to the tire, and he's trying to create some space, and he says to Debbie, "All right, I want you to put your foot on the gas and turn the wheel to the right." And he goes, no, to the right. So she turns the wheel to the right. And he goes, like, "What's the matter with you? I said turn to the right." And she says, "But Dad, I am turning to the right." And again, he's facing the front of the tire with his back to her, and he says, "Well, obviously I meant my right, not yours." The other thing I used to think about as far as, how long he would live was that I had two grandfathers who died when I was 5 or 6 years old. I don't really remember them. So I was hoping that he would live long enough for Matthew to have memories of him. He's got a lot of memories of him. And I do too. So I wasn't sure what to share, and I figured, well, let me do a sports memory, because I know my sisters will not do those. My father was a big sports fan, and we used to watch games all the time. And I remember he used to say, "Okay, we're going to watch the first half. We're watching a football game on a Sunday afternoon. We'll watch the first half. But then, it's a nice day out. We have to go outside and have a catch. And we'll do that through the third quarter, and then we'll come back and watch the fourth quarter." I'm not sure that would fly with certain people here. And I probably was upset that I would miss the third quarter. But thinking back, I certainly wouldn't remember. It was the third quarter of a Giants game. I'm sure they lost the game anyway, right? So, but those catches, and Debbie, I know it's a cliche. At the end of the movie, Field of Dreams, when he says, "Dad, you want to have a catch?" But I had a lot of catches with Scott. I had a lot of catches with Matthew, and invariably, you're having the catch, and I'm thinking back to, like, in Larchmont, that's the little yard on the side of the house, and having catch with him. And they're great memories that I'll cherish and remember the rest of my life.
Jordan, Scott, and Matthew.
Good morning. Thank you all for attending. So much has been said about Mike already, and I just wanted to kind of find a way to quantify his lifetime. And since I work in baseball, I naturally had to go back and bring it to the sport. When Mike was just over a year old, in 1927, Babe Ruth set the true legitimate home run record of 60 homers. And this past Tuesday night, in his final at-bat, the night before Mike passed, Aaron Judge became the second truly legitimate player to match that feat. So what a life. These past couple days, we've been going through his photo albums and all the photos and looking at his yearly photo albums from the 90s and seeing all their trips where they would go to so many countries and cities, and they would go to more countries in 1 year than most people would go to in a decade. So we can just, all hope to live that same life, half of it. And I'm just so thankful I got to spend 28 years of my life with him.
All right, so like Jordan said, everyone else did a really good job of covering everything. So, I just wanted to say that I guess anyone who knows me knows that I always like to brag about the fact that I had 6 grandparents growing up and how amazing that was. And Mike was part of my bonus allotment, so all of the knowledge and experiences and stories that everyone else has just told, that's something that I wasn't born into, but it was something that I was, fortunate to have in my life nonetheless. So it's something that I'm extra grateful for, and something that I'll miss a lot.
So growing up 10 minutes away from my grandfather, I got to hear a lot of stories from his past. And one I really remember is when he was my age, he was 15, He was selling soda pop at the Cleveland Indians games. And the Yankees were in town. It was around July, and Joe DiMaggio had a 56-game hitting streak coming into the game. So he was watching the game. Joe DiMaggio doesn't get a hit. His hitting streak's broken. So he goes home after the game to his father, and he asks, "How much money did you make?" And he says, "None. I was watching the game." So I'll always cherish that I got to spend 15 years with Mike, and I always think that I'm grateful to have a grandfather so close that I could see almost every couple of weeks we'd see him, maybe every week. So it was so great to spend that time with him.
On behalf of all of us, thank you to Susan and Debbie and John, and you guys, Jordan, Scott, Matthew, for sharing such beautiful words about your father and grandfather. I just want to add a few of my own. It was touched upon here and there. Mike may not have been the most observant Jew, but he loved this place. He loved to sing in the pews where all of you are. And most importantly, he cared a great deal for the well-being of the Jewish community. Mike followed his parents' footsteps. He became a leader of the Jewish community here in Fairfield County and in Westport specifically, Temple, Israel. He served on the board of our local federation and the board of the Jewish Home. And here at Temple, Israel, Mike was a longtime member of our board of trustees. He served as vice president and treasurer. Mike had been close with Rabbi Rubenstein, our first senior rabbi. And when it came time to look for a successor, he agreed to co-chair the search committee with Nat Megiddo. Together, they led the process that brought Rabbi Orkand to Temple, Israel, and thus paved the way for a new era of growth and success for our congregation. Rabbi Orkand sent me a few words to share with all of you. He apologizes that he can't be here today. But he writes, "It was 40 years ago that Mike and Nat Megiddo made what they thought was a clandestine trip to Rockford, Illinois, to see me on my home turf. I had applied for the position at Temple Israel, and they wanted to see me preach and teach. The members of the congregation were not supposed to know of Mike and Nat's visit, but it was a small congregation, and they were clearly visitors. Well, unlike the spies in the Torah, Mike and Nat returned to Westport with a good report, and the rest is history. During my entire tenure here at Temple Israel, Mike was always ready to give good advice, solicited or otherwise. His financial acumen was invaluable, and his status as a sage elder offered him a perspective that helped me and the temple leadership make good choices. I am sorry I cannot be with you today, but I want Gloria and the other members of the Stashower family to know how much I loved and appreciated Mike. I am confident that the wonderful memories of him will serve as a source of comfort in the days to come." With those words of tribute and honor ringing in our ears, I offer just a few announcements about the rest of the day and beyond. Burial will take place immediately following the conclusion of this service at the Temple Israel Cemetery, 225 Richards Avenue in Norwalk, We'll have a bit of a procession from here if you'd like to join that, or you can just meet us there. Shiva will be held this afternoon at the Stashower home, 321 Lansdowne here in Westport, from 1 to 5 p.m. And in recognition of Mike's committed leadership of Temple Israel, the family requests that all those wishing to make tzedakah contributions in his memory direct them to Temple Israel. At this time, I invite all to rise for El Malei Rachamim, the memorial prayer. El Malei Rachamim shochein b'meromim. Amtsei menucha nechona tachat kanfei hashechina. Im kedoshihim utorim. Kezohar harakia mazhirim. Et nishmat Mordechai David ben Yosef. Shehalach le'olamo. Ba'al harachamim yastirehu b'seter knafahav le'olamihim. Vayitzror b'tzorah chaim et nishmato, Adonai hu nachalato. Veyanuach b'shalom al mishkavo, v'nomar Amen. Compassionate God, eternal Spirit of the universe, we ask that you grant perfect rest in your sheltering presence to Mike Stashower, who has now entered eternity. O God of mercy, let him find refuge in your eternal presence and in the shadow of your wings. Let his soul be bound up in the bond of everlasting life. God, you are his inheritance. May he rest in peace, and let us say, Amen. At this time, I invite the pallbearers to step into the center aisle. They will help escort their father, father-in-law, grandfather, out of the sanctuary into the waiting hearse. All others may follow behind if you wish.